Okay, so Kaiju number 8, chapter 38. This chapter actually picks up literally where the last one left off, with Kafka regaining control of his body and basically passing out on the ground. And honestly, I kind of feel like the beginning page of this chapter would have fit better as the ending of last week's chapter. Because the opening panel from this chapter was literally just now a way of reusing the same image from the ending of last week's chapter, and the overall events of the beginning page of this chapter, with Kafka regaining control of his body and then passing out, kind of feel like a much more natural way to conclude the fight from last chapter. So I really kind of wish that he would have just basically used this page as the ending of the chapter instead of the close-up shot, as dynamic as it was, of Kafka basically regaining control, especially since if he was just going to be reusing the image anyway. Now, as soon as Kafka actually passes out, we have Director General Shinomiya basically calling off some people, and this is when we get the big reveal from the pan-out shot that apparently about, I want to say, 8 or so soldiers were surrounding Kafka ready to strike. And then this is when we get introduced to the Defense Force's 1st Division Captain, Narmi, whose weapon is actually kind of interesting at first glance. I'm actually playing through this JRPG called Dark Rose Valkyrie right now, and the weapon that Narmi uses in this chapter looks very similar to some of the weapons that they actually use in that game. But anyway, the two of them actually get to talking, and Narmi actually says to Shinomiya that he thought that he was actually intending on dying during the fight. That's why he had himself and the rest of his group actually step in to try to stop Kafka from actually killing him. And this is when we actually end up finding out from Director General Shinomiya that he apparently had Kafka under control the entire time, although he admits that Kafka ended up being a little stronger than he initially planned for. And I actually kind of think that he's not bluffing in this part of the chapter, because like I said in my last review, I really feel like that this entire fight was just a test on Shinomiya's part, basically trying to see if Kafka was actually fully Kaiju and their enemy, or if he's someone that can be trusted. And near the end of the fight, when Kafka was still under the Kaiju side of himself's control, he had basically given up the fight or given up the test, and it seemed like even though Kafka was going in for the final attack, it seemed like he basically was readying a counterattack that possibly would have killed off Kafka in that moment. And I really do believe that he possibly could have done it. I think there really is something about Director General Shinomiya, a strength that we haven't actually seen him unleash just yet. Even though we saw a barrage of attacks throughout these entire fight from him, I really think that he was still holding back even when Kafka had lost control. And the rest of the chapter really does kind of exemplify my idea that he's a lot stronger than he's letting on to be. Because even though he took a lot of damage from that fight with Kafka, throughout the rest of the chapter, he doesn't seem like someone who was being half to death by a kaiju. It more looks like he actually kind of just fell down a flight of stairs and has a few bumps and bruises. And yeah, the fact that he was able to walk away from that fight as if almost nothing happened actually has me really excited to kind of see a fight with him in the future where he actually does get to be serious and actually go for the kill. Anyway, we cut over to a meeting between the Director General and I would assume the rest of the top brass of the Defense Force, where he basically declares that he plans on using Kafka as a military weapon for the Defense Force, and the entirety of the rest of the brass in the meeting are completely against the idea, because there's no reason for them to trust a kaiju, despite the fact that it has a human appearance. And this is when we actually have some really interesting character development kind of for Director General, despite what we had learned about him prior to actually meeting him. Because he basically tells them, listen, Kafka's been working as a soldier with the Defense Force for several months now, and not one time did he actually actively try to harm anybody or sabotage a mission. Plus, on top of that, they are dealing with more Daikaiju as the days go by, and there's really only about 20 or so people in the entire military force who can take on a Daikaiju, and I believe he said only 10 people in the entire military force who can take on one by themselves. So they have this very powerful weapon who wants to work with them, and it makes more sense for them to use him while he actually does want to be a part of the military than basically turn him into a weapon that they possibly might not end up being able to control. And you know, by weapon he obviously means kind of like the weapons that he was using against Kafka in their fight. Basically they take the corpses of kaiju and turn them into weapons that people in the Defense Force can actually use. Kind of like what we saw Kikuru actually have when she joined up in the fight in that last big arc, where we actually get to see her show up with that giant axe. That's another weapon that was developed by Kaiju. I think that was developed by Kaiju number 3, I believe. I had to go back and check. And he actually mentioned the fact that the weapons made from Kaiju number 6 are sitting in the cold storage of the military base because of the fact that no one in the Defense Force has yet been able to use them. And he's afraid that if they actually were to turn Kafka into weapons, the kind of same situation will end up happening. So yeah, the weapon made by Kaiju number 6 is definitely going to be very powerful. And I kind of feel like it's Naoya hinting in the chapter that since Kikuru has a direct connection to Kaiju number 6 for killing her mom, that she should be the one to end up wielding it when we eventually get to reveal to what the weapon is. But she literally just got her axe, which is another weapon made by Kaiju. So it doesn't really make sense for her to get a brand new weapon on top of that. And honestly, I kind of think that since Ishikawa has been shown to be the next recruit after her, who has the most development, that it actually kind of would make sense for him to be the one to eventually end up wielding the weapon from Kaiju number 6. Or at the very least, we know that because of the fact that he is definitely one of the main characters, he will get a weapon made by Kaiju at some point. But anyway, getting back to the meeting, it actually ends with the rest of the top brass still disagreeing with the idea of using Kafka as an officer. And then we actually cut over to Kafka, who's in this kind of like regeneration pod, and he's having a dream, or actually a flashback, to when they actually took Mina's pet who died in the initial Kaiju attack in the beginning of the beginning of the series, and they're burying it. And this is kind of basically just him reassuring himself that he wants to protect her from actually having to suffer like she did back then. Which, by the way, I actually said in the last chapter, I thought it was her dog who died in the flashback when they were kids, but it turns out that was actually a Calco, which is actually a type of cat. And then Kafka actually wakes up in a bed in what looks like a reinforced cell, and the Director General is actually sitting right next to him. And the first thing that Kafka actually says to him, which actually catches the Director General off guard, is that he's actually glad he did not kill him, because had he killed him, he wouldn't be sure how he could actually face Kikaru going forward. And the two of them actually do have a kind of like father-daughter, kind of budding best friend relationship going on right now. So, he doesn't want to lose that. And then obviously the conversation changes to what's going to happen to Kafka going forward. And the Director General basically tells him, listen, you're not a human anymore. If you were, you would have died during that fight, with all the damage that you sustained. So you're definitely a kaiju, but we're actually going to make use of you in the military. The rest of the top brass don't agree with me, so going forward from here, you're going to have to devote yourself to proving them wrong, and that you actually are on the side of the humans. And again, drawing another comparison to Attack on Titan, this is actually very similar to when Eren got revealed to be a Titan shifter, and he had to regain the trust of the military by working alongside them, and proving that he's not a threat. So basically, Kafka's going to have to go through the same kind of journey, where even though the military is letting him work with them, they don't trust him, and he's basically going to have to prove himself as one of their allies. But I guess the kind of big difference is that Kafka actually has the support of the person in charge of the entirety of the military, or at least the most high-ranking officer that we've been introduced to so far, backing him up. And you know what I gotta say? I'm actually kind of surprised that I'm actually liking the Director General as much as I have been these past few chapters, especially after reading this chapter, because everything we heard about him and learned about him from Kikaru going into this arc, or going into his introduction, really kind of made me think that I wouldn't like the character. And honestly, I was kind of fine, again, before this chapter, I kind of would have been fine if Kafka actually would have done enough damage to either retire him or kind of kill him off, or put him at the very least out of commission for a while. Because again, everything we had learned about him prior to this, how strict he was with Kikaru, how he basically was very unfather-like to her, kind of made me think he was going to be a dick. But seeing him kind of go to bat for Kafka, even though it's most likely just for his own gain, another strong ally to basically fight off against the Kaiju with, obviously he'd want to take that. But seeing him, like I said, go to bat for Kafka and actually call him as Kafka Hibino in this chapter instead of calling him Kaiju number 8, I'm starting to see the character in a new light, and I'm actually starting to dig him a little bit more. And then we actually get to the end of the chapter where we cut over to Kaiju number 9, who had just molted his skin, which I think he might be trying to use that as kind of a cover-up to say maybe he died off at some point if anyone actually ends up finding it in the defense force, so that they can actually get off his tail. And it seems like he's actually about to attack some kind of military base, and assumingly he's going to be freeing a Kaiju, because it says at the end of the last chapter that he's going to be taking back Kaiju power that the humans are holding. So either he's going to be freeing a Kaiju that's actually being held captive right now, which I highly doubt they would actually keep alive Kaiju, unless they plan on experimenting it and trying to figure out its origins or something like that, or he's going to be taking some Kaiju-made weapons and somehow reworking them to be actual living Kaiju again. Which, with giving everything we've seen this character do so far, I honestly would not be surprised if he could actually take a Kaiju-made weapon and turn it back into the original Kaiju, or at the very least a much weaker version of the original Kaiju, since it's only a part of the original Kaiju. But yeah, that's pretty much where the chapter ends. This actually was a really interesting chapter, and I cannot wait to get the next one, which, by the way, going forward, Kaiju number 8 is going to actually be having a schedule change, where usually it was about 3 chapters a week, or 3 chapters a month, and then the 4th week in each month was basically just a 0.5 chapter where we got some art, and basically a look forward to the next chapter image from Naoya. But going forward, it's actually going to be going bi-weekly, where we'll get 2 chapters a month, and I think more pages in each chapter. I'm not exactly sure. This chapter was a little bit longer than they usually are. It was 21 pages versus the usual about 17. So if that actually does mean that we're going to be getting more pages each chapter, I'm actually fine with the trade-off of getting only 2 chapters a month instead of 3. But we'll have to see how it goes going forward. But anyway, guys, that's it for the chapter. I really enjoyed this one. Like I said, can't wait for the next one. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. If you liked the video, please subscribe, comment down below with your thoughts on the chapter, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace.